Welcome everybody. It is 7:30 and my gosh, for the last 2 weeks, last week because of the debates and the week before that because of it was the night before DocuFest opened. So we missed a couple of weeks. We got out of the rhythm of doing cinematic conversations. Um, but we're back. We are back. And Cinematic Conversations, as you know, we talk about a film each week. This week, the film is Capital in the 21st Century, and our guest host is Bud Kennedy. And Bud's been a friend of mine for a long time, somebody who any of you who have been going to these things for a while knows that I like to talk, but when it comes to Bud, I like to listen because Bud always has something interesting to say and helps me think in a different direction. For the probably nobody in the audience here who doesn't know, Bud has been writing for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram probably longer than almost anybody who's still working there. Writes about a lot of issues based around Fort Worth and also about food. Welcome, Bud. It's so good to have a chat with you.
Thank you, Bart. I remember when we used to have these conversations by Pony Express back in the day.
Right.
The technology has improved quite a bit at the time I've been in the business. So thank you. You're a wonderful host as well. I look forward.
Well, thank you. So, but this film is based off of a well-known book called with the same title, Capital in the 21st Century. Do you know anything about the book? Have you heard anything about the film before you had seen it?
I was not familiar with it. I did watch it and try to catch up. And Bart, in my career in newspapers, I've been a sports writer and a features writer and an entertainment writer and a investigative editor and a projects editor and a columnist. And the one thing I've never been is a business writer. I don't pretend to know anything at all about money. I do know a little bit about politics. So I've read up and tried to learn quite a bit. I missed the book when it came out. And the first thing that was interesting to me, and I know, Bart, you knew this already, but gosh, this book is from 2013.
Yeah.
And so the studies and the conclusions it reaches, are somewhere right after Obama defeated Romney. It's the way back in the pre-Bernie, pre-Trump time, before we saw all that went on to rise in American politics.
And the trends that he talks about in the film or in the book and then in the film have just accelerated since the era of Trump. And then Trump is really almost completely absent. There's one small little thing, but you can't look at this film and not think about Trump. So from your point of view, there's a lot of, let me just talk for a little bit about this film and then I'll start to ask you some questions.
Hey, Bart,
yeah.
I was wondering if I could share one thing. One thing, economics is much different than business, and I would say, when I say business, I also mean accounting too.
Yeah.
Because accounting is more dealing with acquisition, as opposed to economics, which is more about flow.
Right. Right. So there's business in terms of like, how do you make a lot of money? And the study of economics is about economic systems and how things have flown over years, trends, and there are different theories of economics. And, there are many theories of economics that have done well for us and done very poorly for us.
Right.
And I think the film talks about this in a little bit, but before we get into that, I just want to talk about the film as a film for a moment, because I think I've seen a lot of documentaries, a lot of political documentaries, and I watch an awful lot of documentaries in general, ones that are essentially, this is like a lesson on video, right? It's like going to school with a lot of candy involved in it, and it has more visual interest to it than most films that are something like this, right? There's because the way in which he shot this and the way he uses archival footage, he's really pumping up the visual energy in the film. And it kind of like you're going through all of the sense of history, but you're seeing it in a very cinematic way. And I think that's, to me, one of the reasons why I really liked it so much, and I was so, engaged with the film, and why I enjoyed seeing it. And also the way in which he uses music all the way through to express the ideas in the film, I thought is also incredibly profound, and I think just works really, really well. And I think it just changes the whole way in which we think about how that operation works. And just one last thing, and then we'll sort of get to the economic theory. Just my own sort of personal relationship to this film. So my partner in the podcast, Christopher Llewellyn-Reid, suggested we watch this when it was coming in the summer, when it was in these video on demand series. After COVID happened, this was in the early version of how people were going to distribute work. And I saw the film then and really loved it. And we had an opportunity to interview the filmmaker from New Zealand. And it was a really incredible, after seeing that, I really wanted to show it at DocuFest because I very much like this film. I think it spoke to a lot of where we were at the moment. But just as I was about to make the phone call and book the film, I just looked on Netflix, and there it was at the top of the page. So we decided not to run it at the festival, but this was a way for us to include it here. So anyway, I just wanted to sort of preface my sort of thoughts about the film, and why and what. So Bud, in what do you think is the distillation of the theory that he puts forward in the film? And I think it's also very much in the book as well.
Well, of course, he reaches back over a further period of time into the 19th century to draw parallels and to say that those who are wealthy, rich with land, rich with assets, the rich get richer off their wealth, and not by creating economic development, creating jobs, doing anything that benefits the middle class. And that we're now back in a place in America where the rich get richer off their dividends, off their off all their holdings, and off their rents, and off the appreciation of their real estate, rather than by creating companies or creating new jobs for people. I mean, obviously, there's a tremendous statistical support for that. Starting around maybe around 1980, since then, you can earn more money by just putting in a mutual fund than you can by going out and working hard and starting a company and getting rich off of it. So the people tend to just let their money pile up, and the rich get richer without doing anything that benefits the middle class.
In some cases,
at least that's my takeaway from it, that I come close on that.
And in some cases, it's even worse than just it's not helping, it's making things a lot worse.
Right.
I was watching a film last week, a documentary about the housing crisis worldwide. And what that film postulates was that the real problem is that all of these holding companies, investment companies, are buying these buildings for a lot of money, and they're not even renting them because they just are holding them on for a certain number of years. And it makes more money for them if they're empty than if they're full, which I still don't understand why. But then it gets to the point when it's very hard for average people in middle class to afford relatively affordable housing, and that is a problem as well. But so let's go back through the sort of history, because I think his way he frames the history, I think, is really kind of important. That generally, when you think about economics, you start, maybe 50 years ago, but this goes back way longer than that. So when he talks about the going into the 17th and 18th century, One of the things I thought was really fascinating. Um, there we go. Thank you. One of the things I thought was really fascinating was the life expectancy back then, and how that people were, if I remember correctly, you said it was 17 is life expectancy, and was that the 18th century. And I thought that was, just that, and if if you were lucky, you got to be like an employed, but most people just were at the mercy of the landowners, right?
Was he only talking about the life expectancy of queens of France? No, I'm kidding. That's something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah. Yeah. But and then soon after that, by the way, the film starts in the very beginning about talking about the about communism, sort of post World War II communism, and the and what he saw by traveling through there during that time, and that there was all of this scarcity, and that sort of echoes into later on, but that's sort of the beginning point. But then there's this moment in the film that I think is one of the key things that sort of says what the film is about. And it's that clip from a film that I've never seen where you see this guy like this with this cone on his face, which, does anybody know what that is? It's like, is that some kind of a treatment for your face? Like, and he takes it off and he says, well, has so and so paid their rent? And the other guy says, well, he's died and he didn't pay us our rent. And are you a humanist? Don't you know that, there's, and
Hey, Bart,
yeah.
that cone was typically used for men to put the powdered wig on so that it didn't get on
so
their
that
face.
would, right. So you do the powdered,
See, that explains. Having never worn a powdered wig, I wouldn't know.
maybe I thought that was a precursor to the cone heads.
Is that a judge who knew the answer to that question? That's probably somebody who's a judge.
What is
A
it?
powdered wig judge.
Yeah.
Oh, I
The,
mean,
the only judge is one.
no, he in the
in the movie.
But it starts at that point to sort of talk about the sort of major themes of these are the landholders, and that's sort of what they own that, and their whole perception of the world is they live to bring that in, they don't do anything else, and there isn't that sense of empathy for other people. And I think that's sort of where the sort of the sort of broad theme of history goes into, and that sense of wealth. But then the way he sort of tracks it over the years, I think, is just really kind of fascinating. Are there any parts of that's history you find interesting and want to talk about, Bud?
Well, I thought of course, the movie clips, and then you had the Pride and Prejudice, and then some of the some of the clips he interspersed, the way he interspersed the various scenes. I thought told the story at least in a pop culture sort of way. Some of it was some of it was so cartoonish. It was tough to believe that was the way people really lived back then. The depiction of the wealthy family and their lack of compassion is that I wondered. I thought, okay, yeah, I know people like that, but not everybody I know is like that, and it made me wonder whether things are broadly just as bad now as they were then. And then you got into the little gimmick of the Monopoly game, which you may want to talk about later.
Oh, I definitely want to talk about that. I got to say that.
You got that little gimmick, and that made me think. Okay, one of the lessons of this movie is that the wealthy are inherently evil, and I'm not sure I believe it's as inherent as the movie maker projects.
Yeah, and so and we'll talk about those things. I think that his discussion about slavery, I think from an economics point of view, was really different and a different kind of way of thinking about slavery, that slavery as capital that you could borrow. If you were white, you could go and borrow some money, go down to New Orleans or other places, buy a slave, and then use that as capital to build out your farm, and then you can use that as collateral to get more money and more wealth. But that the whole slave trade, and I just never thought of it in sort of that way, but that clearly is really true.
Bart, I mean, the slave trade was all about property.
Yeah.
And that's something that was almost underplayed in the movie. I mean, the whole the debates that we have today when people say, I have my property rights, and don't you take my property or tread on my property. I mean, that was the way that the slavery issue was framed. It was a taking of property, and
Right.
so when we have debates to this very day, you hear arguments about property rights, and that's the way the slavery debate was framed.
Absolutely. And in some people's heads, that's the way they still believe it should be. There's some comments in the Senate today, but that's another story for another day. So then, that section I thought was really kind of fascinating. And then we get to the part about England and France and colonialism. And, colonialism is something that we don't, when was the last time anybody talked about colonialism and how England and France carved up the world and like took over these territories? It's not something that sort of people talk about, but in the way that they went down in the same kind of way to develop those lands and bring all that money back and that kind of capital back, is just a really kind of fascinating thing. And I think that so much of there are a few times in the world that really have messed things up for things. I think what happened after World War I is one of those things. I think colonialism and the remains of colonialism just have shaped Latin America and Africa for as long as we've been around. And it was all about gaining that capital without like having to do work to do it. I think that kind of context worked really well. You got any thoughts on any of that?
Well, that this is, like you said, we don't know enough about it. We've heard of, the sun never sets on the British Empire, and we've seen movies that show us the British domination, but we don't think of how that fit into the economic system. In my time, we grew up learning about the colonial system as applied in Africa, and we saw that various nations in Africa finally gaining their independence from, Nigeria had already gained its independence. We saw the various other countries breaking up, and we learned that they were breaking away from the colonial history. But we think in America about the colonists coming over and plundering the Indians' land, and we don't really learn about it on a global level of the Brits and the French going out and plundering the rest of the world to bring it home as well.
Yeah, and a little side note, in the one of the films you showed at DocuFest by Alan Governor, the myth
very good
of
film.
What's that?
Very good film.
Yeah. So in there's a scene in there where he's talking about that African Americans in Paris were treated really well, but in Africa and Latin America, where the French were, being colonial powers, those people did not get the same kind of rights and protections, and they were treated in a completely different way. So there was that dichotomy of what's in front of you and what's far away. And I thought that was like a really kind of interesting point. So as the film kind of moves along, we start to sort of see this sort of long sense of history, and it's about people owning land and what they do with that owning land. But then we get into the sense of World War One, and then post World War One and World War Two. And in World War One, which one of the things that he talks about, what I think is really important, whenever there's a problem in your country, sort of divert everybody by saying, you know, the problems are either these people, these immigrants, or these other people, or these Jews, or these African Americans, or these French, or these German, or this other country. And it's a way to divert. And, you know, we've heard this for years in many different ways, but putting it in this context of this sort of economic sense of history, I thought was a really kind of, you know, valuable way to think about, particularly World War One, which we always hear the reason for World War One was the rise of nationalism, but it was nationalism to avoid these problems that people were having, which are mainly that the poor people were poor and, you know, they were not doing very well. But then after both wars, you get the situation where there's not very much money around. So the aristocracy, the oligarchs, which I prefer to call them than because that's what we have. We have American oligarchs, right? So there was, they like didn't have any money. The people didn't have any money, so they taxed the wealthy. And it's the first time when that sort of happens, which enables the Roaring Twenties and the beginning, the very beginnings of the sense of the middle class, which I thought was a really interesting kind of analysis, right?
You have the first progressive era that everybody learns about, and then you have, you know, I mean, although it is in the movie, what the, you know, taxes, you know, during World War II, the top level of income taxes was something like 70% in order to fund the war effort. You know, the tremendous exchange of wealth during and after World War II, you know, was something. And it just says then along came Reagan without saying, you know how far Reagan dropped to the top tier of taxes, and you know how much Reagan and the ensuing free market, you know, the free market Republicans actually dropped that level. They were taxing the rich and putting it back into the war effort, and the wealthy would say it took a long time to undo that and to bring it back to a peacetime level. You know, the working class would say that maybe it should have stayed up there to support it. In the case of Texas, you know, look at the way you had the money spent in Texas. You had you don't have an income tax in Texas, but you had the, you know, tremendous wealth and the federal money that was redevoted. Look at all the federal money around us in the 30s, from the WPA to education, you know, schools, colleges, universities, highway systems. You know, look at all the money that poured back into Texas as a result of some of that wealth, and it was a way to direct funds back to the people.
And but to me, like, this is the actual real point of the movie. So what you said before is the setup. The setup is the aristocratic class, the oligarchs. They make money off the land, they pass it down to their elder son, or they pass it from generation to generation, and that increases the disparity between the wealthy and the poor. And so that's the background. But what Piketty says, I don't know if I pronounce his name right, but his basic core theory is that the way to fix that is taxation on the wealthy, number one, and taxing inherited wealth, because the inherited wealth is what makes the oligarchy pass it down from generation to generation. And the only way in his mind, and I believe this is kind of the core thesis of the book and the film, is that we need to have a robust, not just national but international tax system that taxes the wealthy in a fair way, but that funds governments to do the kind of work that they can do. And I think that is really, it was kind of a revelation to me. And it's not because I sort of didn't know it, But the thing that was really a revelation to me was where you were just sort of talking about Ronald Reagan, and during the Reagan era, and then a little bit after that. Do you remember all the discussion about the death tax?
Oh my gosh. It was all about the horrors of the death tax.
Right, right. And what he is saying in this film and this book is that the tax on inheritance is what stops the oligarchy from keep on generating itself, right? And that's what needs to happen. And I kept thinking about like the sort of genius of the Republicans to take this as clearly people want to tax the wealthy, like poor people want to tax the wealthy. So how do you make them not want to tax the wealthy? You come up with this catchphrase, it's a death tax, we're taxing people on dying. And that's not what it was. It was the very rich people, and they made it sound, they sold it in a way that was against the interests of everyday people. And
Oh,
that was like really powerful. I mean, Leslie, do you remember all that?
yeah, Bart, the death tax directly comes from Frank Luntz, who's a very famous Republican pollster. You may see him on CNN after some of these debates where he does, the group interviews.
Yeah.
But he actually, when they got together, this goes back to the 70s and 80s, back to Lee Atwater, who trained Karl Rove, who trained the Bushes, both of them, by the way. When some of the stuff started to be questioned, they had to come back. It was a tome about this big. I've actually seen it. It's like almost a foot tall. And for every single objection that anybody could ever make on any talk show, in any newspaper, in any publication, in any student meeting, they had an answer to it. And he was the one that actually invented that term, the death tax. So
And we're living with that. I mean,
Mhm.
and I remember in the 60s, one time when I was growing up, I mean, people paid a lot of taxes. The tax rates were substantial. And if you think about, we'll get to this in a second, but I want to go back to one other thing, and then we'll come back to this, I promise. There were two things that I thought about in that sort of history as he was going through that sort of caught my attention. And that's like after the First World War, the aristocracy needed people to spend money, and there were two things that they did that are still with us today to sort of pump a lot of energy into the economic system. And one of them was fashion, that up until that time, people would just wear the same thing they wore last year and not think twice about it. And what fashion does is, like, I got to get the new thing because that's what all the cool kids are wearing. And nobody wants to be the uncool kid. So everybody wants to wear the Jewish Community Center basketball jersey, which is the most fashionable thing one can wear, of course. And the red glasses that go with it. It's just the right combination. But having that sense of fashion is an economic driver, right? And that, I think, is a really important concept. And I think we probably knew that in the back of our heads, but to articulate it in that way, I thought was really kind of great. And then, of course, the other one, which is, I guess we're mid-October. So probably in 3 weeks, we'll be getting the first Christmas songs, right? And so the whole notion of Christmas is, again, an economic driver. And in the older days, I mean, I sort of knew that Christmas in the olden days was not that big of a deal. And the film, he talks about that it was just like people would get together and have drinks, and maybe at New Year's they might share a few gifts, but not what it is now. And now, how much of consumer goods is driven by Christmas? I mean, it supports like 3 months of the economy. And of course, 80% of that's made in China, but that's a whole nother story in and of
Well, Bart,
itself. Yeah.
Bart, don't you think that was just low hanging fruit though? Because what you're really talking about when you talk about both fashion and Christmas are the rise of the giant retailers in America, the rise of the Sears, Roebucks, and the Montgomery Wards that had to have something to sell, and that were the first retailers that went into every small town with their catalogs, and you could have everything out of this catalog right here, right now. certainly Christmas was commercialized, and even more commercialized when, my gosh, we moved Thanksgiving in order to have more Christmas. Thanksgiving was originally the last Thursday in November. Now it's always the fourth Thursday in November, so that when you have a November with 5 Thursdays, it doesn't delay the Christmas season.
Oh, I just assumed it was the Dallas Cowboys who changed that.
Well, actually, Texas refused to change. There's another whole story about that. Texas refused to change because that was that darn liberal socialist Roosevelt's Thanksgiving, and we're not changing the way those darn liberal socialists change. So this is another whole story. But in Texas, there were 2 Thanksgivings from the 40s into the 50s, and there were like the turkey and the Macy's parade would be on one day, but the Texas A&M football game would be on the next Thursday and things like that. But the Christmas, the commercialization of Christmas was just a part of that. It was the retailing of America, and the trends then that we see now with today's Amazon. I mean, Montgomery Ward and Sears had as much impact in the teens and 20s, and Dallas and Fort Worth both have giant buildings to show for it. The giant Sears building in Dallas, the giant Montgomery Ward building in Fort Worth. These were the distribution centers for the Southern United States for those stores. They were the Amazon of their day. And so you had the growth of retailing. And I think, certainly you can pick out, fashion and Christmas as 2 examples, but there was more to it. There was convincing people to spend money, and that they had to go out and get what was new. And in the new catalog, the catalog came out 4 times a year. You always had to get in what was in the new catalog, and just convincing them in general that they had to spend more money in retail and not just live in the same flour sack that they had down at the general store, which my grandparents used to wear.
And then just to take a half step back from that, before there were those stores, even smaller stores in the larger cities, and indeed Dallas was and is and sort of gained a reputation as being a hub of all of these things, from many different things over the years. But before that, there were peddlers, and a lot of Jewish people and other minorities would go in their little carts and just travel around, and the only things that people could buy were the things these peddlers sold. And in some cases, there were stores that wouldn't sell to African Americans, and the only thing that any of them could get were from these peddlers who would come around. And some of these peddlers then started the stores, and they became some of the big department stores we have now. And that's kind of this interesting kind of history there. Okay.
Can
now,
I just?
yeah,
Oh,
go on.
I was going to share one thing. Piketty has a new book out, and apparently he was interviewed in February by The Guardian, the British newspaper.
Yes.
And he's pretty wealthy now from his books. They were a big success. And he talks about how he would have liked to have paid 90 to 95% in tax. He didn't need the money. Who knows if he did. But listen to this, nor has he wanted the huge sums offered to him by hedge funds who have asked him to come and lecture them on the worrying excesses of capitalism, as if they didn't know already. Whenever he turns such offers down, he says the companies just double or triple the fee, but he always says no. Funny, isn't it? I mean,
yeah,
they want to get in bed with him.
Would he share some of those contacts with the hedge funds? Do you think they'd let us come and? Well, never mind.
Yeah, we'll come and make that. We'll just send this video to them, and we'll collect it.
I have declined all offers I received from hedge funds to come and talk about the evils of wealth.
Kelly, you had something to say.
I was going to say that the other benefit of that 90% is, most people didn't pay that. Most people, but they had lots of ways to get around it by spending money.
Yeah, right. Or donating to nonprofits.
Those who had it to spend it. It wasn't that they didn't have a lot of deductions. They had a ton of deductions, and people thinking, oh, we need a simpler tax plan. I'm like, no, we need ones with lots of deductions, because it encourages those who have money to put it back into the economy rather than just pocket it.
Mhm.
And if we can go back to the 50s, 50s and 60s, when all this stuff was sort of changing, the middle class was evolving. There were 2 things, many things going on there. But one is the rise of unions. and that labor meant something, and unions had real power because they had to create the material that sort of drove the whole system. But it also, those unions and those workers truly created the middle class because they got the wages they had so they could buy things and get housing if you were white, and could do all those things to, participate in the middle class. And it was really kind of an important thing. And also the other thing that happened is because they were taxing people at a reasonable level to get things done, there was actual infrastructure being done. And the major thing, of course, is the highway system. And for the last 4 years, like Infrastructure Week was a joke because you can never create infrastructure. And the reason that you can't create infrastructure is because Republicans don't want to spend money, period. It's like there's the percentage, and it's a smaller and smaller and smaller percentage that has control over so much of politics because of really stupid reasons, and because they have no problem just trying to control things rather than having any moral compass. But they have no problem with the way things are. And I think there's no, like, we should have free internet for everybody that's really high speed, right? I mean, it's like that's the equivalent of the interstate system. And that's not a hard thing to do. Technologically, we have people that can do that. And it's a lot easier than buying all the land that it took and going out and making those roads and doing all those things. But there is no will to do things for the common good. I mean, that's just sort of like, and from Reagan on, and that's the time. And this film is really good at sort of pinpointing the moment. And it was the air traffic controllers. I mean, do you remember this, Bud, during that time?
Very much so, and because air traffic controllers would drink in the bar we went to at the paper, and so we would see them at Smacko's in Arlington after games. It would be the Rangers fans, it would be the sports writers and the air traffic controllers.
Was this before they were working or after they were working?
They were on their way to work.
This is while they were on strike, I remember. And so it's this ongoing deal of what's the damn Washington going to do to you now? Are they going to make you go back? And I remember it very, very well. I don't remember it as being the first big back-breaking strike that really caused a dramatic turn, but I do remember it as a big event.
I actually do remember that as a kind of a moment. And if I remember correctly, the union actually backed Reagan, and it was just this incredible betrayal. But there is this sense that if labor is too strong and they have all these regulations, and the wealthy have to pay more money to those people, and they want to pay as little as possible. And before Reagan, it wasn't, there was the labor union was, I mean, still was having some problems, but it was still very powerful. And that just was the first time that, since the old days, the coal miner strikes, when the government literally went out, and there's some great footage of, coal miners being, attacked by United States Army, right?
Yeah.
The Army going after Americans in the strikes.
Harlan County, I remember it well.
Yeah, and the Harlan County.
And I'll add in the Swift and Armor packing houses here in Fort Worth too, the same kind of stress labor union situation. The only lynching in Fort Worth history was during a butcher's strike, someone who was considered a strike break. But I don't remember the air traffic controllers being a dramatic turn, but it did come along during that time. Remember though, Bart, that's still a time when we're in the Cold War. I mean, the defense jobs,
right.
The defense unions were so strong. The defense plant unions at Vought, at Bell, at Lockheed, General Dynamics back then have always been so strong. Defense workers unions building a stronger America. Yeah. I'm not saying that the air traffic controllers wasn't important, but you still had strong unions at the time. Now about all we have left, we have strong police unions, and that's about it.
Right. The only unions that are really bad are the ones we still have, and that are having a negative impact. Okay, so I've been putting this off and putting this off. it's time to talk about Monopoly. Um, did, so, Bud, had you ever heard of this study before the film?
I'd never heard of the study. And I've got to say, to me, it was pretty vapid. It was interesting to watch, but all it really proved was that college kids are a-holes, and that if you give one side more than the other side, then they're going to jeer and boast and brag when they win, and they're going to continue to be a-holes. I don't think it made any sort of sweeping conclusion about human nature like it's presented in the film.
So I would start to counter that, and perhaps it would have been stronger if instead of having college kids do this, if they had a broader range of people doing that. I think it might have been a little bit, better. But when I saw that, my first thought went to the Trump kids. I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking as they were doing it. These are kids that were, because of the luck of the draw of being born into that family, that they have no empathy. And it's clear, if you think about how Donald Trump lives his life, he clearly has no empathy for anybody else. And all of the things, the way in which all of those assholes who got the best deal, every sort of trait that they had, everything they said, is the stuff that Donald Trump and his elder sons talk about all the time. It's the exact smugness. It's like, there was one time when they said, well, I guess I guess I'm better at buying the houses or picking the things, and not at all having any sense that it was from the luck of the draw, and it had nothing to do with skill. And I do think that it does display a kind of insensitivity. I mean, at the core, what it is the let them eat cake, or as what's her name? Halsey said, only poor people pay taxes. Only little people pay taxes.
Was it Ivanka? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
But I just don't believe that there is a higher percentage of disgustingly revolting, selfish, wealthy people than there is a percentage of disgustingly revolting, selfish, working class people. I mean, there are just as many boorish clods, who want to argue about whether they need to wear their mask in the store, and who have just the same sense of entitlement. The sense of entitlement. The Trumps are not a very good example, let's face it, of philanthropic families. I mean, there have been great philanthropic families in America who've given, who've given 90% of their wealth to charities, and just more charities. They still had quite a bit to keep. They've given a lot of it away.
No question.
The Trumps are not the best example, and there are some revoltingly selfish people out there who do not have nearly a dime.
Leona Helmsley, that's who you were thinking of.
Right.
Oh my God.
Hotelier, or whatever you want to call her.
Only little people pay taxes. So, okay. So, but I'll take you on this. And I think you're right. There are bad people all over. What makes those people who don't want to wear masks feel entitled? And in the way we've all seen these videos where these really obnoxious people, but there's something that makes them feel that they're entitled to do that. And I don't know what that is.
And I've seen a study on this lately, and it's just this enhanced sense of self that they believe they don't have to take orders from anybody. And some of them are the same people who don't believe they have to get vaccines, although there are some of those people on the left-hand side of the political realm as well. Yeah. They just believe that they don't have to listen to what anybody else says. And then they'll throw back at you and say, well, this is my personal responsibility, and that it kind of ignores the medicine of how the virus is passed along. But it really is, some of it's, some of Bart is just simply wanting to get attention and to call attention to themselves. There are people who feel like they'd be nobody if they didn't stand out and get attention. They get attention just like a little kid by saying, no, I'm not going to wear my mask. It's just like the people on Yelp who are the only person who blasts the restaurant everybody else loves, and somebody else goes in and says, well, I went, it was awful, and they didn't bring me my Splenda the way I wanted it. And just, the people do things to get attention. And that seems to be a lot of the motivating factor behind these hostile goon kind of crowds who believe that they don't have to do anything anybody else said.
So this gets us a little off the film, but we're at this moment. Let me just sort of, part of this also is just, I think that people just don't believe the government and the whole thing about vaccines. And now it's hard to believe anybody. I mean, because there's so much bad information that sort of keeps coming out and just like spewing out continuously. How do we ever get to a place when people can trust the government? The government says something and they believe it. I know my theory is that started, that the problem started with the Kennedy assassination and the Warren report. I mean, I think that was like when, before then, people actually believed what the government would say. But I think there is a need to trust the government again.
Well, Bart, I have good news for you. There is always an increase in the distrust of institutions in the last year of a presidency.
Oh.
Usually that is the 8th year of a presidency. You saw the Waco and the backlashes against Bill Clinton in the last years of his presidency. You see the rise of militias and the rise of backlash in the last years of the Obama presidency. Usually it means that a presidential term is coming to an end and the nation's unsettled, wondering who the leader is going to be. In this particular year, the president himself, as they say, he's like a bull in a china shop who brings his own china. He set out from the beginning to undermine all institutions that he didn't control. And so his effort to undermine, whether it's to compromise the church and to undermine various government agencies and undermine the media and undermine faith in every other institution in America. To some extent, it's been successful over this term, but it doesn't really take long for people to go back to what they're doing and be satisfied again that they're getting the kind of performance and service that they think that the various agencies should provide. It's been there wasn't far to fall for some of these. There wasn't far to fall for some of the people in media. There wasn't far to fall for some of the church groups that had undergone child molester scandals and other events like that. So it wasn't too hard to disrupt our belief in these institutions, but he certainly has tried to make it even worse and to crack America every different way. But we do kind of have these kind of problems at the end of every presidential cycle, and it seems to have come up in a just as strong a way this year.
Well, thank you that's like the best news I've heard in a while, that maybe this is the last year. Hopefully it is. But also, if that's the case, then I think there's possibly a chance that things could be better in a new administration. I mean, it seems to me Joe Biden is the kind of person who is not going to lie just to lie. And I think the idea that we can bring some sense of credibility back is good, but there will always be right-wing media which will, say everything's a lie, and we sort of have to deal with that. I think we're living in a different media age when each side picks its own version of the truth and pushes it out. I think that's a bit of a problem.
More than that, I don't want to bring you down again about this, but remember this: the incumbent president is not going away, and I fully expect for him to run for president again in 2024 and to never back off his campaign, to continue what he does right now, to continue it for the next 4 years. And so I think that that you'll just continue to see his campaign for a return.
I mean, I think he'll still do campaign rallies because that's probably his only form of income, and he's got a lot of debt coming up, and he needs to make some money somehow. But maybe it's just like an illusion, and maybe I'm just living under this I don't know what's going on, but I think he's going to jail. I mean, I think that like New York is going after him. They've got his taxes. There were things that the Stormy Daniels money. I mean, while he was president, they couldn't do anything. I don't think anybody's going to give him a pardon, and I think he's going to go to jail. And
So somebody asked, somebody asked me about that today. If he really is worried about going to jail, the one thing he could do is he could resign. Pence becomes president for a couple months, and Pence could pardon him.
But I heard that.
Just the way, Ford did for Nixon. They
But
could
only
do a deal.
federal, only for the federal stuff.
Right.
You still have state problems.
But
Yeah.
yeah, that's true. But they may try to put a lid on it just to, they didn't go after Bush for Iraq. He's still run as a war criminal in Europe. They did nothing.
But I
the
think
president has
Obama did nothing about that.
The president, well, I mean, they're just going to be happy if he moves out of the White House without having to be let out by marshals. They'll be happy about it. That may be his plea bargain, that he says, I'll move out of the White House as long as you let me go. And, I mean, that may wind up being what that comes down to. But the fact of the matter is he's got great lawyers. He's had great lawyers consistently, and he doesn't have Roy Cohn anymore, but he is the litigatingest,
Right.
suingest. Remember that the only thing that has really damaged him is a virus is the one thing that he couldn't sue.
Yeah.
And so this is the only thing that he could not send lawyers to lash out at. And so, otherwise he has an incredible record of success in court. And, there's no reason to believe that he wouldn't mount just as ferocious a defense.
Well, I do believe he will mount a ferocious attack, but I do believe that he has, as the New York Times reported, a significant amount of debt coming up with no way to pay for it. And if you're having trouble paying for your lifestyle, it's going to be really hard to pay for the lawyers that he's able to easily pay for now. But he'll always find somebody who will fund his craziness.
He's never paid for anything anyway. He hires people, and they say, "Yes, sir, I'm very, very proud to work for you, Mr. Trump." And then they finish the work, and he says, "This is awful. This is horrible. How dare you try to charge me for this?" And it all goes away. I mean, he never did pay anybody.
So what do you think the next 4 years will be like?
That is really something that I don't have a handle on. I think it really depends on how the Senate falls, and whether we have a split Congress. I think that that Biden comes in, if he does win, as he appears to be winning, that he comes in as sort of a peacemaker president, and to calm the nation, calm the troubled waters. And I think that business reacts well. I think that Wall Street reacts well. I think there are some militia groups that will give him some trouble. I think they gave President Obama some trouble. I think that after that, you get into the question pretty early, though, of how long is Joe going to stay? And is he going to stay the full 4 years, or does he plan to retire at some point? And then that becomes the question is, okay, Joe won the election, which was what he was there for. And now the younger Democrats will be restless for him to move on and get out of the way and let everybody else start stepping up the ladder.
I think that's a weird conspiracy theory that he would leave before 4 years. I mean, I agree he probably won't make it 8 years, but but he certainly would intend, in my opinion, to go 4 years. Anyway,
I think
we'll
it's
see.
really a
I mean,
matter.
I hope we'll find out.
His,
If
his
his health allows him to continue for 4 years, I think that he continues 4 years. But
Yeah.
I mean, you just can't be sure when you're dealing with somebody of that age.
Oh,
Not
sure.
being of that age, I'll say you can't be
I
sure
agree.
when you're dealing with
I
somebody
agree
of
with that. I thought you meant he planned it that way.
Is it a more looming problem now? The court, I mean, Roe could fall, gay rights are challenged, voting rights, speech. There's so many decisions that could be overturned and likely will be. That presents a whole different world, a rollback to a world that we haven't had to live with for a long time. And it seems inevitable. You know, the Federalists have got to be preparing a barrage of cases to get to the Supreme Court as fast as they can and overturn these longstanding rules that we've all come to live with. That to me has got me even more depressed than the possibility of Trump winning again.
All right, so let me ask you one other question, while we're kind of moving away from this, and then I want to read a summation of the book that I got from Wikipedia to end this discussion. But because you're smarter than I am, and I value your opinion, what do you think of this court packing idea? Because my sense is the Republicans have made a mockery of the court by the Merrick Garland thing and what they're doing this week. And I think that they have lost any moral authority to say, oh no, you can't pack a court. That's wrong. After they've done this, and it's not in the Constitution any place where it says how many judges you have. And obviously, FDR had a real problem when he tried to do it. What do you think is reasonable, and what is your perception of this sense of court packing?
Well, I think that the courts have been packed against the little person for, some years now. I think if you look at in Texas, we've had what's called lawsuit reform that meant basically you couldn't sue anybody and get really what you deserved. And it was very limited, what kind of settlements or judgments there could be in cases. I think the movements for lawsuit reform have already packed the legal system. So for Republicans to accuse Democrats of overweighing one side of the scale, it's been weighed in the other direction for quite some time, and continues to be weighed in the other direction. If I were the Democrats, I would just say, well, we're just seeking court reform. But so I don't think that the packing the court argument stands up when you look at the way that the court decisions and the holding up in court have changed. Bart, before, I know you have a wrap up about the movie. I just want to ask you if it struck you as odd that so much of the wealth, and going back to the movie for a minute, so much of the wealth that we know and we see here in Texas involves the energy industry.
Yeah.
And so much of my sense of the wealth around the world involves the energy industry. And there was very little reference. There was one segment about the energy industry, except it was the energy industry that decided the First World War and that strengthened America in the Second World War. And I thought it was peculiar that the energy industry almost, got a complete pass in the movie. I don't know if you've read or heard any other thing about that. And then I know you had some other content on the movie too.
You're absolutely right that certainly does have a sort of a major force, and I believe, sort of my sense of this is that energy will also have a major player in the next 30 years, but in a completely different way. I mean, I think that green energy and development of green energy provides, a whole bunch of new jobs that are available. If I remember correctly, I heard that coal there was least amount of coal being used in the United States than ever. And so the fossil fuel business is starting to go away. Electric cars are going to be much more prevalent, and I think that the job creation and the way in which wealth is gathered is in a shifting state. But historically, like one way, and this is like another film, is looking at how energy has shaped U.S. policy, like as far back as we've been around. And I think that's a very good and clear case to be made.
Energy is the number one shaper of U.S. policy and of U.S. defense policy and foreign policy. And you can go back to Sid Richardson taking Ike out on the boat in Eagle Mountain Lake and telling him, Ike, we need you to run for president. And, you can go back to the fact that the discoveries of the great Texas oil fields, swung World War I for the Americans. And maybe I'm giving a Texas-centric point of view, but it sure seems like that the energy industry worldwide has the greatest influence on foreign policy, and that the wealth from that, and including the rise and fall of nations and the way intelligence agencies are active in various nations, and the rise and fall of that energy wealth, and the changes as people see money to be made in green energy, and as people see middle class jobs maybe to grow in green energy, the changes that brings seem to be a whole element of the story that was left out of the movie and out of the book.
It's 20 years, 20 years old, but the book, The Prize by Daniel Yergin, which was also made in a documentary, is still very accurate. There may not be one up to date, but energy is going to be what people are going to be going to war over. China, Russia, it's huge geopolitical.
Yeah, and water too. That's another one.
And water. Yeah.
Who had another point they wanted to make?
Yeah.
Public Trust is a really good film about public lands where there's a huge attempt to get more and more transferred to private, and that's all about the energy industry. And I thought a terrific film right now.
I think it's going to be, if it's not yet, it'll be on YouTube for free.
It is. Yeah, I saw it yesterday.
Yeah.
So that YouTube for free.
Clearly something, and just the point, but to your point, this is what like books and documentaries do, is they frame the issue through one lens. And in this case, what he does it through the lens of capital and wealth. There are certainly people who have written books and made films about that it's healthcare that determines who we are and what we do, and you can do it about housing. And it's like it is the nature of like writing and academia to find a lens to look through the problems that we do and look back into a historical perspective. And indeed, there are a lot of films that are like, how did we get here? And this film is one way of how we got here. And his way of an answer is, higher taxes on the wealth, and particularly higher taxes on inheritance are the two major ways to shift. So let me just read like this very quick thing, and then we'll have some closing thoughts, and then we want to talk a little bit about our DocuFest and award our winners from that. And I want to mention our TV show this week. So the book's central thesis is that when the rate of return on capital is greater than the rate of economic growth over the long term, the result is a concentration of wealth. And this unequal distribution of wealth causes social and economic instability. Piketty proposes a global system of progressive wealth taxes to help reduce the inequality and avoid the vast majority of wealth coming under control of a tiny minority. The book thus argues that unless capitalism is reformed, the very democratic order will be threatened. Does that make sense? So that's his point in a paragraph.
Does it make sense that it's his idea he's throwing out there? Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we know that we need more. We don't need more sales taxes. We know that we need more taxes on corporate income, on property. We know that we need more taxes on those who can best pay. And having a global tax system obviously is not something that works politically, but they're
Right.
throwing it out there and saying somebody needs to do something is a way to get it started.
Absolutely, and I think that's clearly what needs to be happening. And just one more quick thing. I know we've gone way over than we should. That part of the problem why this can't happen is that because of the way the election finance rules are, corporate interests can heavily influence Congress, and it makes it really hard for them to have the kind of changes that are really kind of necessary. So it's like, so there's reasons why it hasn't been able to change. And unless the public really come out in a strong way, and there's a complete kind of change in the way we think about leadership, I think we're going to be stuck. Okay, having said that, first, Bud, thank you. Bud, it's just always good to listen to you. I really appreciate you. Wish you could just come over here and hang out here in Dallas a lot more. But it's just being in your presence is really wonderful.
Thank you, Bart. I'll try to bring some nice philanthropic people over and we'll talk about it.
Okay, maybe they could help fund our organization. That would be great. Tax deductible, So the other thing I want to mention is this Thursday night at 10:30 on KERA, and that would be tomorrow night. Mark, what are we showing this week?
Proof.
What is Proof?
If you didn't get a chance to see it at the drive-in, Bart, I've got to thank you again. When I realized Proof was going to be in VideoFest, I thought, well, it'll be nice. It'll get streamed. People will see it on their computers or on their televisions, and that's kind of what I expected. I never expected to see it writ large on a drive-in theater screen with great projection and pretty good sound and no popcorn, but it was terrific. It was so much fun, and the best thing was to be with people.
Yeah.
Oh my God, to just be hanging out with people again at a distance, masked, was that was worth the price of admission.
It was emotionally extremely fulfilling to be in the presence of friends and community to watch a good film together. So Thursday night, you get to watch it on your TV, a slightly different version, just a little bit shorter, but it's still very much, if you haven't seen it. What's that?
It's bleeped for PBS.
Right, because there are certain words you can say on television, even after
Right,
television.
MB, it's bleeped.
Bleeped.
Actually, we don't bleep them. We cut out two frames of dialogue. So it just sort of, because if you bleep it, it draws attention to it.
Right.
So we draw.
Anyway, yes, 10:30 tomorrow night. The broadcast version of Proof will be on television.
All right. So as soon as you turn off of this, go to your DVR and record that so you can see it. All right. So here we go. I have a script to read here. A couple of weeks ago, we had our festival, which was really great. It was a hybrid, as Mark mentioned. It was so wonderful to be at a place where you could actually connect to people, see people watching a film together. It was wonderful. It really made me good. Okay, feel good. Okay, we want to thank Falcon Events. We want to thank our sponsors, Texas Commission for the Arts, TACA, the Myerson Family Foundation, and National Endowment for the Arts, and Jeff and Johnny Lachelle. Thank you to Kelly Kitchens and to Falcon. Stay tuned for a Q&A. Oh, that's what I was supposed to say at the beginning, which will happen now. So, and thank you to the Tin Star, which is where we are. So the winner of this year's festival, documentary festival, we have three things to announce. We have what I call the Meta Media Award, which is the best film about media. And this one is not done by a jury. This one is my pick. And this year that goes to Miracle Fishing by Miles Hargrove.
Yeah.
Miles is not here, but is Emily still here? Yes. Hey there.
Hi.
Yay!
Hi.
Yes.
Yes, that's awesome. Thank you. Yes, he's on a shoot tonight, so we can't Aubrey. But it's bedtime for these two. Say thank you on behalf of your dad. Thank you. What a treat.
We'll be getting you a trophy, and we really appreciate it. And is it going to be shown again somewhere somehow?
I hope so. I just don't know when and how and what it's going to look like, but
okay.
I hope so. We have to talk to our friend James Faust.
So we would be happy to do anything we can to get another screening any place we can. So if there's something going on, let us know. We will definitely support it. Okay, so the best documentary goes to Coming Clean by Andi Timon. And Andi is here. Did I pronounce that right?
Andi? You did. I'm impressed.
Oh, great.
That's not the usual. It's usually Timoner if people are left to their own.
And I usually get things wrong. Well, congratulations. Thank you so much for letting us show your film. So for those who haven't seen the film, this is a powerful look at the opioid crisis in a really kind of compelling way. I mean, oftentimes we find out these things in the news in small bites, but documentaries can do this in a much more profound way. So do you want to just talk for a minute about like why you made this film?
Yeah, my Zoom turned off while you were speaking. So I just want to make sure. Okay, there you are again.
Okay, I can hear you.
Okay, I seem to be frozen, but you can see me as well?
I can see a still image of you. And it looks like, is that David Bowie behind you?
That is David Bowie, and I'm just smiling, but I'm speaking.
Yes.
So would you mind if I just relaunch my Zoom for a second? It said to relaunch.
No, you could just, but this is fine. We want to hear you.
I'll just speak. So what your question is, what motivated the film or what's the film about?
Yeah.
Well, I think that there's a lot of films that try to tackle addiction, but they tackle it from more of a stigma producing perspective. And the goal with this film is to close that gap and to really put forth a bridge for empathy, to understand that this happens to just anyone. It can happen to you. It happens to your mother, your sister, your brother, your doctor, your lawyer. And there's just an awful lot of untreated pain in America, mental health especially. And so when these painkillers come along, they treat more than just the physical pain, and that leads to addiction quite easily. And so the film is really one-stop shopping for our attempt to kind of make a food Inc. for how to understand where this crisis came from and how to get out of it. On a personal level and also on a policy level. And it really follows the stories of policy leaders who are impacted directly by people who are in recovery or have suffered from addiction. And the connection between those people is absolutely heart-wrenching and uplifting at the same time. And so it's been a real pleasure making the film over 3 years. It's changed my life and my perspective on how I see things. And I think, you know, lead prosecutor Mike Moore's participation in the film was invaluable as well, because you really have a front row seat to the epidemic and how it was perpetrated on this country. And unfortunately, overdose deaths are up over 50% as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're going to see, you know, upwards of 100,000 plus deaths this year from this ongoing crisis. So I hope the film will get out to as many people as possible. And you guys awarding us this is really meaningful. Thank you.
I hope that helps you get it shown more places. So is there any place where people can see the film if they miss it at our festival?
They can see the film actually starting tomorrow. It'll be online via Milwaukee Film Festival. And I believe, did not give them any certainly didn't geo-block it on our end. So Milwaukee Film Festival, we're the centerpiece film there.
Oh, great.
We're also playing Denver Film Festival, closing night of Bend Film Festival. If you're in Key West, we're playing there. And we're lining up, you know, obviously distribution right now. So that's the hope, is that we we land with the national streamer eventually and everybody can see it. And we're also going to try to do a tour of treatment centers. So if anybody watching this or in your organization has any suggestions, if you want us to bring it back to Dallas and target your population there that needs it, let me know.
Oh, sounds great. So the most
Coming
immediate
Clean
thing
Movie.
is the Milwaukee Festival.
Next
And-
one's Milwaukee, and Coming Clean Movie. I forgot to say comingcleanmovie.com is the website, and that's also the social media. So
Well, and it's an important film, and it's just so well made. I mean, it's like there are a lot of things that can talk about an issue, but having a well-constructed film that tells a good story with good people in it really makes a difference. So we really appreciate you. So thank you so much, and thank you for coming and hanging out with us tonight.
that was a fascinating conversation. I learned a lot, actually.
Hey, come back. We do this every Wednesday night, and I'm not sure what we're doing next week, but on Monday you'll find out. I'll give you some time to think about it. So we have two more things to talk about. The honorable mention goes to Jimmy Carter, Rock and Roll President by Mary Wharton. I don't think Mary is here, but did you guys see this film? This film is great. It's a really wonderful film. And I think there are ways where you can find this. If you go online, you can get this in a one of those virtual cinema deals. And it's a side of Jimmy Carter that most people just don't know. And then the last one is the best documentary short goes to Shoulder Deep by John Feige, who lives in Austin. And it's this really kind of mix of self-identity and dance. And it's in African American, it's just very, very beautifully done. And the other short films we showed were also really incredible. So guys, it's like 8:47. We're like 15 minutes overtime, which is like, we don't do that. We generally keep to time. But Bud, it's always, like I said, it's always great listening to Bud. Bud has great things to say. It's wonderful to see all of your faces. I've missed you for the last 2 weeks. And we're working to get a month's worth in the schedule so you don't have to like figure this out. But thank you all so much for being here. It means a lot to me. And have a great night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks.